You don't need to
So,
go. Like I said, if you don't insult, I don't mind talking. But if you insult, then I have to block. But yeah, you got to have your Bible and Quran ready for me to answer your questions.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess if we can begin.
Sure. Go ahead.
I just have this one sincere question. I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart.
Go ahead, man.
So So I understand like a lot of the vast majority of New Testament scholars right now in our day and age, they don't class like the I am statements you find in the book of John as like historically like accurate, right?
Why?
I was reading Richard Bauckham's book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses and stuff, and he came to the conclusion that like the I am statements you find in the Gospel of John, they're just advanced theological developments, and in order to find the historical Jesus, you have to refer back to like the Synoptic Gospels.
Yeah.
Do you know any way to like rebuttal that? Because this is my main issue I have.
It's just, I've already rebutted it. I've already rebutted that. Before we go on, I know the argument. I've already rebutted that. I've even written on it, and I've done sessions on it. Let me repeat what you were saying so people can understand. Awesome. And guys, I want you to hear from Shadman. So now you can know he's not here to attack, so you don't need to block him anymore. He's not a typical Muslim where he comes to attack and insult and blaspheme. So you can see so far. Anyway, so we'll give him benefit of the doubt. He is representing the current state of Christian scholarship. I want you to hear what this young man said. He's not making it up. So you don't condemn him. You don't blame him. He's telling you what you're going to learn in college and seminary by even those who confess to be conservatives, that in John, much of what you have in John are not the words of the historical Jesus. It's more of an interpretation. It's more of John theologizing, telling you what Jesus meant, but not giving you the actual words of Jesus. You guys aware of that? That's what they teach. I want you to understand what he just represented. So this young man is a gift. God is sending him to tell you what your own conservatives are teaching Christians. So don't blame the Muslims here. Don't blame him. It's not his fault. This man's picking up a book, a commentary by someone who claims to be a scholar of the Bible and a conservative, and he's reading his notes, Richard Bauckham, which I know he got from a website, but that's besides the point. Richard Bauckham says, in the Gospel of John, you don't have the words of the historical Jesus. You have John giving you the meaning, the interpretation of Jesus, but not the actual words of Jesus. If you want to know the actual words of Jesus, you got to go to Mark, Matthew, and Luke. This is what you're going to find, folks. Now, my challenge to these scholars would be, for the first 1,800 years of the church, can you find any conservative Christian, believing Christian, not someone who's an atheist, agnostic, not someone who denies the historicity of the Bible, but someone who affirms its historicity, and that the authors of the books whose names are attached to these books, or which we find in tradition, ascribing these books to these authors, believe that these were the authors. For example, there is no competing tradition. This is not for you, Shadman. I'm talking to them. I'm going to come to your question. There is no competing tradition anywhere in church history that someone other than Matthew wrote the gospel attributed to him, someone other than Mark wrote the gospel attributed to him, someone other than Luke wrote the gospel of Luke and Acts, and so on and so forth. That is a modern criticism. But if you go back as far as you trace the manuscript evidence, the historical evidence, even as far back as Irenaeus, the disciple of Polycarp, Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark wrote Mark, Luke wrote Luke, John wrote John, no competing voices in the church where they argued about the authorship of these books. Now let's put that aside. You won't find any one of them questioning the historicity of John. Their belief was that John focused on those aspects of Jesus's teaching that Matthew, Mark, and Luke did not mention, and it only makes sense. Why then repeat the very material found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? You already have that material in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If that's all John wanted to do, then he didn't need to write anything, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke already say basically the same thing. John comes along and gives us those details, not mentioned in the other Gospels, details of the historical Jesus, in order to give us a more complete picture. That was the view of the church. Now, besides that, what evidence do I have that the I am sayings of Jesus are genuine, and the authors knew about these I am sayings, but even though they knew about them, they didn't feel the need to mention all of them, but that they're aware of it? Yes. Mark 6, 45 to 52, Matthew 14, 22 to 33, and John 6, 16 to 21, all repeat the same miracle story of Jesus walking on water And then when the disciples saw him walking at water at night, they thought they saw a ghost. And in Greek, he says, ego eimi, I am, do not be afraid. It's the exact same story. And in Mark 6:50, you read it. He says, ego eimi, I am, do not be afraid. Matthew 14:27, ego eimi, I am, do not be afraid. John 6:20, ego eimi, I am, do not be afraid. So right there, you have a miracle story of Jesus in which he unveils his identity as the divine I am, as the Lord of the winds and the seas and the waves, who subjugates them by his power. That's found in John, that's already in Mark and Matthew. And yet, guess what? Luke doesn't mention it. So if you're going to subscribe to the views of modern scholarship that says that Luke used Mark, that means Luke would have been aware of that I am saying, but didn't include it, which confirms my point. They were aware of the I am sayings, but for their purposes, they didn't feel the need to include many of them or any of them in the case of Luke, not because they didn't know the I am sayings, but because for their purpose, they didn't include them. That's the answer. So now you need to explain to me, how is it in Mark 6, the first of the Gospels, according to modern scholarship, you have an I am saying of Jesus found in John 6 in the context of Jesus walking over upon the waters to demonstrate his sovereign authority over the winds and the waves, something that the Hebrew scriptures ascribe to Yahweh alone. Explain that to me.
Yeah, so I personally, I do believe that all the Gospels do portray Jesus as divine.
But that's not my question, Chad. I didn't say the divine. You're using Bart Ehrman on me. It's not going to help you use Bart Ehrman. This is an I am saying. Mark 6:50, ego eimi. It's I am. I am saying found in John 6:20. So it's not whether Mark portrays Jesus as divine in some sense, Bart Ehrman. I know where you're getting the argument from. It's the exact same story where Jesus says, ego eimi, I am, which in Hebrew would have been anihu or anokihu, in a context where he's walking over the waters and he calms the winds and the waves as a display of him being the Lord of heaven and earth, the one who subjugates and tramples the winds and the waves under his feet, which according to the Old Testament is ascribed only to Yahweh, such as Job chapter 9, verse 8, Job chapter 9, verse 8, and Psalm 107, you can read from 22 to 30. So my question is, what do you do with the I am saying found by Mark in the same context that's found in John as an affirmation of Jesus being the human manifestation of Yahweh?
I wouldn't, you see, I can't object to that. What you said is the truth. I mean, they all, you see, even in, I don't want to divert or anything, but I know even in Mark 1, it's already quoting Isaiah 40 verse 3. You know?
And which is found in John, right?
Which is not in John, exactly.
No, it is in John. No, I didn't say it's not. It's found. Yes, it is in John. It's in John 1:23, where the Baptist says, I am the voice of Isaiah, as the prophet Isaiah said, of one crying out in the wilderness. So in John 1:23, John the Baptist says, I am the voice that cries out in the wilderness, as the prophet Isaiah announced. So Mark 1 and John 1 both agree Jesus is the Lord of Isaiah 40, and both agree that John the Baptist is the voice, the forerunner, preparing the people for the appearance of Yahweh, who turns out to be Jesus. So the so-called earliest gospel and the last of the gospels both begin by affirming that Jesus is the God of Israel, the human appearance of Yahweh.
I agree with that. I don't object to that.
So where is the development?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Where's the development? If the earliest gospel portrayed Jesus as Yahweh in the flesh, because scholars say Mark is the earliest gospel. I'm not saying they're right. Let's assume, let's buy into their assumptions. Mark is the first of the gospels. And then the latest gospel, supposedly John, because John is the last of the gospels. So if you have Mark affirming Jesus is Yahweh in the flesh, and you have John affirming that Jesus is Yahweh in the flesh, where's the development in Christology?
Yeah, now I don't see the development at all, because they all portray him as Yahweh in the flesh. Now that I look at it, yeah.
So that's why I'm aware of the arguments of scholars, and I don't buy it. I'm not convinced, because it's not true. Matthew, Mark, Luke are unaware of the I am sayings. Why? I just gave you an example. Mark 6:50. The Greek is right there. Ego eimi, I am, do not be afraid. Exact same context is found in John 6, because Mark, Matthew, and John record the same miracle story. So I want to repeat it for everyone else, because I was speaking a little fast. Again, everyone write down Mark 6:45 to 52. Matthew 14, 22 to 33, Matthew 14, 22 to 33, and write down John 6, 16 to 21. It's the same story. It's Jesus walking on water. And it actually appears in the same context because in Mark 6, Matthew 14, and John 6, it follows up Jesus's miraculous feeding of the 5,000 men. With women and children to be more. So here, Mark, Matthew, and John all record the miraculous feeding of the 5,000 in the wilderness with a few loaves and a few fish. And then all record there right after that, the disciples got in the boat to head to the other side. And in the middle of the night, Jesus walked on water and said, Ego in me, I am, do not be afraid. So I'm going to ask you the question so you can get the point, which you already got, but just for emphasis. Sure. If you believe that's what scholars say, that Luke used Mark as one of his sources, right? Because Matthew and Luke supposedly used Mark. And then they edited Mark and changed Mark according to the view of scholars. Let's go with that. Let's assume they're right. That means Luke would have been aware of this story because it appears in Matthew. So if Matthew and Luke are using Mark, Mark has the story of Jesus walking on water after feeding the 5,000 men in the wilderness with a few loaves and few fish. And then as he walks on the water, he says, I am, do not be afraid. Matthew includes both the miraculous feeding and Jesus walking on water and claiming to be the I am, ego eimi, I am. Luke had Mark, would have seen that story, but didn't include it. Isn't this proof that the writers, at least let's stick with Luke, Luke was aware of the I am sayings, even though he didn't include them?
He definitely was aware of them, yeah. If he's using Mark as a source and he's using the gospel Q and like an L source, he's aware of all the I am statements you find.
So that's,
I won't object to that, yeah.
That's my point. Just because John records more I am sayings than found in Matthew and Mark, and in Luke, you don't even find one example of Jesus using ego eimi that's similar to that of John. That doesn't mean they're not aware of it. It means they had their own reasons for including the material that they wanted to be included, because there's only so much information you can include in a scroll that is so long, and so they have to be selective. And this is where John comes and says, I'm going to now complement these gospels by not repeating what's already there, because it's already there. Matthew repeats much of Mark, Luke repeats much of Mark, and Matthew and Luke have a lot of material in agreement. So I'm going to now include that aspect of Jesus's teaching, not mention another three, to give a more complete picture. This has been a view of the church for centuries until the rise of modern critical biblical scholarship. Why are they wrong?
Yeah, okay. So I see. So we would take the early church moreover than compared to the scholars in our day and age.
Yeah,
I can see. Because I'm guessing for the first 300 years. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you take their assumption that because there are things not found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and only found in John, therefore that means the things in John are not as historically reliable, or that John is not giving you history but the interpretation of Jesus. Would you subscribe to that assumption and say then that by that same principle, when the Quran quotes Jesus saying something that's not found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that definitely is not historical?
It's a hard one.
Because that's the assumption, right? What's the assumption?
Yeah, I can see the double standards playing. Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, you understand the assumption? The assumption is, since John quotes Jesus saying things and doing things not found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that means the things of John must be either fabrications, stuff he made up and attributed to Jesus, or John is giving you an inspired interpretation of what Jesus meant, but not actual history. So we go with that assumption. I look to the Quran, and there are things that Jesus says in the Quran not found, and even directly contradicts what's found in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, and even John. So by their principle, that means the Quran cannot be trusted and should be rejected, right?
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So why do Muslims use scholars selectively and not consistently, and just go all the way and become agnostic and atheist like the apostate prophet?
Yeah, I can't really answer that in my opinion.
What's the other question?
Yeah, just this last question, Brother Sam. It's just so the Zechariah 9:9 prophecy about how it speaks about like behold your king is coming to you. If I can remember correctly, behold your king is coming to you with a foal on a colt and on a donkey or whatnot. So I've seen. So I believe in Mark 11, John 12, Luke 19. It mentions that Jesus sits on one donkey. It says sat on each. Right?
And nowhere in Matthew 21 does it say he sits on two. Read it again. Didn't say he sat on both.
Matthew 21. Okay, let me just pull it
Nowhere does it say he sat on two. If you read it, it says there was a donkey and her foal, and that Jesus' disciples placed their garments on the foal, and he sat on them. What's the them that he sat on? Reread it. I know what you're talking about. It's Matthew 21.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so it says the disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them.
And what's on them? What did he sit on?
The cloak.
The cloak's on the donkey. So the reason why you have a donkey and her colt is because you have a foal that's untrained and needs the mother to lead it and guide it as a source of comfort. So there you have the foal and the mommy, the mother donkey. The mother donkey would be leading the foal. And so they put their garments on the donkey and her foal, and Jesus sat on them. What's the them? Both of them, or on the foal and the clothes that were placed upon the foal for Jesus to sit on?
Can you just repeat that last part one more time?
So what did Jesus sit on? On both of them, or did he sat on the foal and the garments that were placed on the foal, the colt?
The foal and then the garments that are placed on the foal.
Only someone who wants to insist there's a contradiction will say he sat on both the donkey and the foal.
Okay, I get it now.
There's no contradiction. That's just someone wanting to read unsympathetically to make the Gospels contradict in order to discredit their historicity.
I got you. Thank you, brother. This is just the two main things that I tried to cover it up. But
you don't have any more questions?
You go ahead. Yeah.
No. Do you have any more?
No. That's pretty much it. Yeah, I'll have to hop off. I'll have to go to bed. But thank you. I mean, I can call you some other time.
Yeah, go ahead. Let me know when you have. We'll go live again.
Thank you so much, brother.
Anytime, Shamoun. Take care.
Have a good night. You too.